Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's second edition of TIME100 Talks. I'm Dan Maxey, Executive Editor at Time and Editorial Director of the TIME100, and we've got a great show for you. Today's conversations will focus on all of the innovative ways that leaders, parents, and educators are trying to help schools meet the extraordinary challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. To discuss, we have Dr. Harry L. Williams, President and CEO of the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. He will be speaking with Time Washington correspondent Vera Berengruen about how the organization is servicing their students amid the pandemic. We also have Sal Khan, founder and CEO of the Khan Academy. He will be talking to Time senior editor Emma Barker-Bonomo about the many factors that play into a family's decision to continue at home or in-school learning. Later on in the show, TIME100 Talks correspondent Ashley C. Ford will be speaking with filmmaker J.J. Abrams and singer Sara Bareilles. They'll share some insight on how young artists and students who might be having a difficult time right now can exercise their creative muscles. But right now, Ashley will be speaking with Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms about how her city is managing COVID-19 and what she thinks about schools in her city reopening.
Hi, I'm Ashley C. Ford, correspondent for TIME100 Talks, and I'm joined by Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Ashley. Nice to talk to you. How are you today?
I'm pretty good, doing all right.
Good.
Absolutely. Mayor Bottoms, I know that you and your family had your own personal experience with COVID-19 earlier this summer, so I just wanted to check in and ask how everyone's doing and recovering.
Compared to so many other folk, Ashley, we're doing great. I had a great conversation with a young man, Justin Hunter, today, who lost both his parents to
Mm.
COVID. So when I look at families like Justin's family, I mean, we count our blessings. My husband's still having a lot of the side effects or after effects, rather, that you hear about with COVID, headaches, joint fatigue, nausea, all these things that we don't know what that's all about. But all in all, we're doing great.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. After being one of the first states to reopen, you guys down in Georgia have been hit pretty hard by COVID-19 numbers wise. What have you learned about leading people during this time?
And not only have we been hit, but it's not getting any better. And that
Mm.
is the most frustrating part of it. But what I've learned is that you do the best that you can do, and you do it for the right reasons. And if it works out, that's great. But if it doesn't go the way that you plan, you got to be able to sleep at night. And um, what I've said all along is that I want people to be on the other side of COVID. And even with my dispute with the governor of Georgia, I've said, I hope that he's right and I'm wrong, because if he's wrong, more people will die. And unfortunately, he's wrong, and continues to be wrong about this. We open up too soon. That's the reality of it. And it's not too late for so many families. It really is too late, but it's not for us too late as a state to turn this trend around. And I just hope that people will continue to exercise common sense and good judgment and be thoughtful about people other than themselves.
This is a very hard thing to do right now as a leader, I think, is to try to talk with people and mitigate some of the damage that this virus has spread across the country. So I'm assuming some of your constituents think reopening was too soon, as you do, and some of them probably don't. How are you navigating those conversations with community members and with business owners?
Well, I think our best example is New York. New York was hit first. They were hit hardest, and Governor Cuomo made very sound decisions, and New Yorkers made very unselfish decisions in terms of closing down, shutting things down, and hunkering down to get to the other side of it. And as New Yorkers reemerge into day-to-day life, you're able to think about things like, can the kids go back to school, and how businesses reopen? And those are the things that get the economy restarted. So I certainly understand people's concerns. about the economy and they need to get back to work. But there is something called sacrifice. And in the midst of a pandemic, it calls on all of us to make sacrifices, to tough it out. And again, I know it's easy for me to say as my refrigerator is full and my lights are on.
Mhm.
So I don't want to dismiss what people are feeling, but the other part of that is as leaders, that's why we got to make decisions for people so that they can keep their lights on, so they can have food in their pantry. Those are the things that we have to do to make it easier for people to stay home right now.
What do you think other leaders across the country, or what do you hope other leaders across the country, other mayors, governors, up through the highest level of government are learning from this right now? Like, what do you hope they're getting from
Leadership is as much about leading as it is following.
it?
So I gave the example of New York. We had a really good example of a state that got it right. We could have followed the lead of New York. But you also have an opportunity to lead and to make decisions on behalf of your constituents. And it's my hope that's what leaders are understanding right now. It's not always appropriate for you to be the first. Sometimes you need to follow. And it's not going to always be easy. We're not elected to make easy decisions. We are elected to make tough decisions. And we have to have patience. We have to have empathy. And we also have to know what we don't know. As I make decisions related to COVID, I'm not making them based on what I know about medical science or public health. That's not my area of expertise. But I do have sense enough to listen to the folk who have this area of expertise. And what they're telling me, follow the data and the science and the metrics and make your decisions based on that.
Do you think Georgia should shut down again?
I think Georgia should roll back.
Mm.
I definitely think Georgia should roll back. I believe there should be a statewide mask mandate that would go a very long way. I think that it's too soon for schools to reopen at the very least. I think parents and teachers and staff need to have the option of whether or not they will engage in virtual learning or send kids back into the classroom. It's simply too soon.
Mhm.
We're seeing it already in our state. As schools have reopened, kids are getting infected, and it's, in my opinion, and this is my opinion as a parent, it's more disruptive to think you're sending your child into a situation and then have to pull them all back out. And that's what's
Right.
happening in schools throughout the state.
Right. Have you sent your children back into school, or are they staying home?
Thankfully, my kids' school have they will have an option of virtual learning. We are not sending our kids back. I have one who's starting college in a couple of weeks. He'll be virtual only. All of my kids will be virtual only for the first few weeks of school. Atlanta Public Schools is going 9 weeks virtual only,
Mhm.
and then we'll revisit system wide.
If it gets to the point where the state is not willing to assist or actively works against some of those rollbacks that you think we need to see in order to get this virus under control in Georgia, and in Atlanta, do you have a plan in place for what happens to Atlanta and how you try to protect your constituents even in the midst of that kind of pushback?
Well, from an organization standpoint, the city of Atlanta as an organization will not go back to business as usual. And that has been a guiding point for a number of businesses throughout the city. They're looking to our lead. We had an advisory council that made recommendations on how the city should proceed in terms of reopening. We're back at phase one based on data and metrics, which also means that many of our large job centers, because the metro area is home to 26 Fortune 500 companies, have not reopened as if it's business as usual. So that's been very helpful. Even the Atlanta University Center, in making their decisions, looked at where we were with our metrics and recommendations and made decisions accordingly. So we'll continue to do what we can do, even if they are recommendations advisory recommendations. We're going to continue to do the research, continue to talk to the experts, and offer what we think is our best advice to constituents across the city. And I truly believe if we weren't making those decisions and offering these recommendations to people, that our numbers would likely be much worse.
Mm. You mentioned personal responsibility and personal sacrifice and being unselfish as some of the reasons why New York, where I am, was able to sort of get a lid on this thing after a while and watch this entire city begin to slow the spread. What do you think is fueling this resistance to mask wearing or social distancing or taking precautions at all in the face of COVID-19?
It's Donald Trump.
Mm.
When you have people like Donald Trump and even Governor Brian Kemp pushing back, people look to leaders for examples. And when you have the President of the United States saying it's a hoax, people believe that it's a hoax. When you have governors who won't make sound decisions based on science, people who believe in their leadership will also not make sound decisions based on science. I love, there was these great T-shirts that somebody printed up. It said, "I'm gonna go with Keisha on this one." So in the same way people are following Donald Trump and Brian Kemp, people are looking to me to see what my recommendations will be. Which again is why I'm not making them based on what I think or what I want or what I hope. I'm basing recommendations based on science and data and metrics. So when the ICU beds open up and when the positive rates begin to trend downward and all these metrics fall into place, we'll move on to the other phases. And with 4 kids in my house, I can tell you, nobody wants school reopened more than me.
I can believe that.
We are a whole scenario right here. I'm a working parent.
Right.
And it's hard. So we all want to be back to business as usual, but hoping that it happens and wishing that it happens and saying it's happening is not the same as it actually that is actually happening.
Right.
Based on the science, it's just not happening right now.
Right. And, I know that in the midst of, trying to protect the city and trying to save as many lives as possible, that in July, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp sued you over Atlanta's mask mandate. What do you think is the motivation behind that suit?
I have no idea. I know I was sued the day after Donald Trump came to Atlanta, and I pointed out that he violated our mask ordinance because he didn't have on a mask and he was at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport.
Mm.
I don't think it was a coincidence. It was the day afterwards. There were cities all over the state that put in place mask ordinances, beginning with my good friend Van Johnson in Savannah. He didn't sue any of the other cities. He didn't even sue the city of Atlanta. He sued me personally and my city council personally. So this was something that was very personal, but I don't know. I don't know if it was because of the demographics of the city. I don't know if it's because I'm a woman, if it's because I called out Donald Trump. I have no idea. It could be all of the above or none of the above, but it was odd.
Yeah, I can see. It seems odd. I will say that from the perspective outside looking in, it definitely does seem.
Well, thank you for confirming. Sometimes we think things, but it's always better to have it independently verified.
It's always better to have somebody just giving you that look, kind of like, yeah, I saw that. Mm-hmm. During the pandemic, Atlanta has been a hotspot also for demonstrations against racist systemic violence from the state. you've been praised and criticized for your reactions to those demonstrations, but how are you continuing to foster those conversations with the leaders of these communities and with everyday people in Atlanta who just want something different?
Yeah, and very simply put, leading is hard. Everybody's not going to agree with you. I remember one day sitting thinking there were two breathing beings on this earth who were pleased with me, and those were the two puppies in the backyard. Like everybody, my family was upset with me. I mean, everybody was upset with me. But that being said, my mother often reminds me, you only have to tell the truth once. And I've heard people say that we're dealing with these two pandemics at once, this health pandemic and this systemic pandemic called racism. And I will always speak my truth, and people may disagree with it. And when I speak my truth, it's not to lecture people in a sense that I think my thoughts are better than yours. This is my opinion. I'm going to tell you how I feel about this. And what I feel is what I expressed. We've got some real issues in this city and in this country, and you've seen the frustration and the anger bubble over and boil up in our streets. And until we deal with those underlying issues, they're going to keep boiling over and spilling over into our streets. To the extent that we've had any grace in Atlanta, I truly believe it's because we have been doing the work, and we were doing the work but before we started seeing the movement happening before our eyes this summer. And even our relationships with our police officers. We have at Promise Youth Centers that are staffed by our police officers, volunteer and serve as mentors to kids, and really working to build these proactive relationships with our kids. But that being said, we're far from perfect. So just before Rayshard Brooks was killed, we had convened, he heeded the call from President Obama to take a look at our use of force policies. We met maybe the day before he was killed, but it gave a sense of urgency to the work that was already there, but really purpose and urgency. So we've gotten 33 recommendations, and we're continuing to move forward with that work. We'd already begun closing down our jail, doing some real work on criminal justice reform. We had eliminated cash bail bonds. We closed our jail to ICE. We had done so much work, but there's so much more to be done. We talked about affordable housing in the city. We're already $300 million into a $1 billion goal on affordable housing. 20,000 units, we're already close to 5,000 in. But it's still not enough. And that's what we are seeing in our streets. People are tired of waiting.
Right.
Nobody has patience anymore. So that's the challenge that I have as a leader, and I think leaders have across this country. There are things that are going to take us longer. We're filling in the blanks for 400 years. So it's going to take a little time, but there's still things that we got to deliver just like this to our communities, and that's the urgency and the sense of purpose that I've taken out of this summer.
What support do cities need to make progress like that possible? Like the progress that you want to see in your city? What do you need?
We need support from the highest level of office in this land. And I wasn't mayor during the Obama-Biden administration, but I hear in the good old days, you could pick up the phone and you could call the White House. And if you had challenges with your police department, there was somebody from the Justice Department who would come in and help you reframe your policies. In the good old days, even if you weren't aligned with the same party, you could still pick up the phone and call the White House and get some assistance when your communities were struggling and you needed help. That's the leadership we need. I spend so much time thinking about things that I shouldn't have to think about as a mayor. I shouldn't be managing my a pandemic response for my state, which, in a lot of ways I'm having to do that because I'm having to stand in the gap for failed policies from this governor and from the White House. So while I'm managing a pandemic response, the pandemic that probably could have been contained had there been better decisions made months ago. You're also dealing with criminal justice reform, and I can't call the Justice Department and get some assistance with that. We got to figure it out. So many things that we're figuring out on our own. What we need is leadership, real leadership.
What role could the state of Georgia play in the presidential election in November? And to what extent do you think the outcome of how the state votes will hinge on residents' ability to easily and safely cast their ballots?
I was so happy to go and cast my vote this past week during our runoff at State Farm Arena, which is owned by the city of Atlanta. It's where the Atlanta Hawks play. And in response to the debacle of the June primary, Coach Pierce and the Hawks as an organization said, we want to do something meaningful. We want to be a part of some solutions in this city. So they challenged us to adhere to the 8 Can't Wait, which we've done that. They also said, we're going to put our money where our mouth is, open up our arena so that people don't have to stand in line for 8 hours to try and cast a vote. Those are the type things where we have private folk stepping up saying, I want to be a part of the solution. How can I do it? This is what we've been thinking about. So we've got to continue to do that. But also what I've been saying to people, we can't leave it up to thin margins either. Votes will be suppressed in November. We saw them suppressed in June. So we don't have a friend in the Secretary of State's office. We don't have a friend in the governor's office. But what we do have is the power to exercise our right to vote and turn it up in numbers in such a way that there's not going to be any question when all of the votes are counted and it's all said and done. I was recently cleaning out my office and I found some paperwork where I was a voter protection attorney in 2008 in South Carolina during President Obama and Vice President Biden's election. Those are the type of things we're going to need in November. We're going to need election attorneys at precincts available to answer questions and help weed through the mess that's likely to be before us in November.
Absolutely. Mayor Bottoms, thank you so much for your time. I cannot tell you how much I've enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to seeing what you continue to do down there in Georgia.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for having me. I've enjoyed the conversation as well.
Now, we still have some great conversations coming your way, including one I'll be having with filmmaker J.J. Abrams and singer Sara Bareilles about their new series, Little Voice. But first, we recently caught up with lawyer and disability rights advocate Haben Girma. She's discussing how disability and love are driving forces behind today's innovation. Check it out.
Ableism is the widespread assumption that disabled people are inferior to non-disabled people. We're not inferior, but that's the assumption that's embedded in our culture.
I prefer real hugs to typed hugs.
A lot of people are probably wondering, if you're deafblind, how are you communicating? So to access information around me, I use one of my strongest senses, my sense of touch. And I'm using a computer here that has Braille on the bottom. I run my fingers over the dots and feel the letters. And that's how I access books, documents, and I use mainstream computers like iPhones and laptops to access email and websites that are accessible. There were 2 friends in Italy, one blind, one sighted. And these 2 friends wanted to exchange letters. This was back before email, back before even Braille. And if a blind person wanted to write a letter, they had to dictate it and someone else would write it down for them. These friends couldn't do that. They had to keep their letters secret. They were love letters. They used this as a design challenge. How do we make a way to write that doesn't require sight? They developed one of the first working typewriters. And with a typewriter, you can memorize the layout of the keys and touch just by feeling the keys. And type just by feeling the keys. Nowadays, lots of people write letters on keyboards, and some of the fastest typists are touch typists. Disability drives innovation. Love also drives innovation. Disabled people are incredibly adaptive. We find ways to come up with solutions every time we face a new challenge. One of the things I'm most concerned of is discrimination in the medical field. We've heard of so many stories of disabled people being denied care because of assumptions of our quality of life. So many people assume that my quality of life is awful just because I have a disability. And I don't need to tell you that's not true.
We encourage you to participate in today's conversations using the hashtag TIME100Talks. Do you think schools should reopen during the pandemic? Let us know your thoughts. Up next, we have Time Washington correspondent Vera Birengruin speaking with the president and CEO of the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, Dr. Harry L. Williams.
Hi, I'm Vera Birengruin. I'm the Washington correspondent for Time. And joining us today is Harry Williams, the CEO of the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, a nonprofit that represents more than 300,000 students at 47 historically Black colleges across the country. Welcome to Time 100 Talks.
Good morning. It's good to be here with you this morning. Thank you.
Well, so obviously for all of us, the upcoming school year is looking extremely different than we could have expected 6 months or a year ago. And so what are some of the biggest challenges for the Thurgood Marshall College Fund and the students that it supports as you navigate this whole new normal, and how are you trying to change your plans and programs to address this?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And you're right. This is the time of the year when students are planning to go back to school, but unfortunately with COVID-19 and what's happening real time, it's been making it very, very difficult. As you all recall, in March, when most of the schools, all the schools actually in the country, had to pivot and exit out in a very, very quick way. The students that we serve come from challenging communities. And so therefore, it was very, very difficult for some of our students. As you referenced in your earlier remarks about TMCF, we have more than 300,000 students attending our institution, but majority of our students who attend come from families that have financial challenges for them to go to school. So therefore, when they had to pivot very quickly, they didn't have any extra money to buy airline tickets, to find transportation home, or to pay for rent. So therefore, we at TMCF, we immediately went into action to provide support to those young people. A large percentage, a small percentage actually stayed on campus because they had nowhere to go. So It's been very, very, very difficult for the students that we serve.
Yeah. And so, you obviously is a top advocate for these students. When you think about colleges' decisions looking forward to the next couple of months in terms of distance learning or in-person learning and all of that, I mean, how do you balance the impact that will be, the impact on students in terms of their educational needs or their health needs?
Yeah, it's been, again, as I said, it's been difficult, mainly because we want our students to continue their education journey, right? So part of the challenge for our students, as you know, as far as the data, African Americans have disproportionately been impacted by COVID-19 more so than any other community, and more specifically death. And a lot of our students come from those communities. So therefore, life is here now. So students are making real life decisions as it relates to, do I go back to school or do I stay home and help my family out? Because in addition to the unfortunate situation that's happening with them as far as family members dying, you also have family members who've lost their jobs. So that is another barrier on top of that. And what we do know is that we want students to continue their educational journey, because once you stop and then you get in life, then you start dealing with life, it's hard, it's that much harder for you to get back in to start to finish. So we've been working with members of Congress to try to get funding, scholarships to support our students. We've been working with our corporate partners, and they have doubled down in their support to get scholarships so that these students can continue their education.
So student organizing is such a key component of these social movements and political campaigns, especially now, and not having students able to be physically together and organize on a campus. How do you think that's going to impact, the conversation that we're having right now, especially extending into the fall and into next year?
Well, social media, we have a way of keeping connected to each other through social media. And as you know, our namesake, Thurgood Marshall, his legacy stands for basically the three pillars: social justice, equality, and education. That's what Thurgood Marshall was all about. That was his life and journey. Our students who are on our campuses recognize the need for social equality in this country. And so that a lot of the social unrest created the disturbance that's happening right now with the unfortunate incident with George Floyd, created a lot of these challenges. So our students are communicating with each other. They are engaging. They've been part of some of the protests that's been out there, and they've been wearing their masks. Then they've been doing the things that you need to do in terms of standing up for what is right. And I still see that as continuing in terms of that process.
Right, regardless of whether you're physically there or not. And relatedly, this is causing a massive disruption across the world, across higher education. But you referenced earlier, the unique challenges faced by HBCUs, which have a different financial situation. Could you tell us a bit more about, how are you managing that financial impact? How are you trying to set it up? So, obviously this is going to stretch on for the near future. Extended future, we don't know. So what are HBCUs trying to do in order to set themselves up to be able to, minimize that impact?
So what we're doing, we're working with our corporate partners, and what I can say, our partners have doubled down in their support of our students. Let me give you a stat. 73% of our students who attend HBCUs will qualify for a federal program called the Pell Grant. The Pell Grant is an entitlement program, and those dollars will go to the most neediest students. And in order for a family of four to qualify, the maximum family income would be $50,000. Our students, the maximum income for their families is less than $20,000. So think about that. $20,000, and you're trying to go to college, and in some cases, college will double that amount. And then that financial stress associated with that, and you're the first one, not only you're the first one in your family to go to college. So that's another barrier that you have to deal with in terms of the challenges associated with that. So what we do here to minimize that, we raise funds with our partners, with foundations. And what we do know that the number one reason why students do not finish college is not because they cannot do it academically, it's because they can't afford it. So part of our challenge here, and part of the support that we've been getting, is setting up scholarships so that they can, not loans, but scholarships, so that when they graduate, they don't have a big debt that they have to pay back. They have loans so they can jump right into the workforce as relates to those scholarship programs. And what we've been seeing, we've seen an increase in the number of support from corporations, from major corporations like Amazon. Employees got together. We just celebrated. They did an employee fundraiser for us, raised over $1 million to support these students. We set up an emergency fund immediately to help these students. Microsoft jumped in. We've had a lot of corporate partners that have said, we want to help these young people because they play a critical role in our society.
Right, and related to that, I mean, obviously the scholarships and and the financial support, but also you've spoken about this in the past, the technological infrastructure that was kind of missing. I mean, that's true in many places, but especially for a lot of these students, in order to actually be able to do distance learning and not disrupt their education. How has that been in terms of just trying to make sure that they've got the resources they need?
Absolutely. That's been another challenge. And in some places when students had to shift from face-to-face to online, they went back to their communities. In some communities in rural Alabama, I talked to the president, President Ross at Alabama State, and he shared with me that 15% of his students, 15% of his students had to go back into a community where they didn't have broadband access. They didn't have the Starbucks. You couldn't go to the Starbucks to get the Wi-Fi. So they didn't have access. So those students had to pivot, and they had to go back in terms of how they would communicate with their faculty through correspondence. Can you imagine correspondence where you write your information and you mail it in for your faculty member to review it in this day and age? And so that's real, and that's real not only in rural Alabama, also in rural Mississippi. So we've been working to try to make sure that funding coming from the federal government will provide the necessary resources to help these young people. And what this pandemic has done is actually put a magnifying glass on the challenges, just magnified it so that those challenges have been exposed even more so for our institutions.
Right, and as well for your partners, like you mentioned. I mean, conversely, we're talking about all these challenges, but they've also, been recently the recipients of an influx of high-profile donations. We have the philanthropist Mackenzie Scott, Netflix CEO Reed Hastings. Why do you think support for HBCUs has become such a focal point in this larger conversation about equality and social justice in America, and especially in 2020 in this particular environment with the pandemic and everything else going on?
Well, I think, again, they have become a focal point because America recognized the importance of these institutions and what they have done. The reality, if we didn't have HBCUs in this country, there would be no Black middle class, period, plain and simple. These institutions were created with sole purpose of providing educational opportunities for African Americans at the end of slavery. And that at that time, Black students could not attend white institutions. So therefore, these institutions were created with that sole purpose. And by creating these institutions, we now have Black doctors, we have Black lawyers, we have Black professionals, we have Black people in key positions across this country. And it was the HBCUs that played a critical role with that establishment. And the reality, the students that we serve usually are students who have challenges coming from educational communities where they've had some challenges in their educational upbringing, and by bringing them and giving them some additional support to help them. And so part of our goal here at TMCF is to continue to talk about the importance of these institutions and the critical role that they play in our society in providing opportunity for those that may not have those opportunities otherwise.
Right, and part of this debate, which has really kind of taken off during the Democratic primaries as well. There was a Biden proposal for racial equity, which advocates making HBCUs tuition free. What would the impact of that kind of proposal be? I mean, obviously there's been a lot of similar things in that vein proposed, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, that would be huge. I mean, for the first time, when all of the Democratic candidates had an HBCU platform. And part of it was very deliberate. TMCF played a critical role in that, along with UNCF and NAFIO, the three major national advocacy groups, working with members to magnify the profile of our HBCUs. But if we can get free tuition for those students, not only those students who are attending HBCUs, but students who have financial challenges, it would be a game changer in this country. What we're asking for, we're asking to double the Pell, because Pell is a critical entitlement program to support those students to help them graduate. 30 years ago, the Pell covered maybe 60% of their education. Now, if it's 10%, that's good. So therefore, by increasing that federal program, will create a major game changer for this country, and to provide incredible opportunity for so many people.
Yeah. And then, you also just, back to something you said as well about, again, this kind of double situation happening this particular year that's putting HBCUs kind of, in the spotlight so much. I believe, Congresswoman Barbara Lee called it the pandemic within a pandemic. You have this massive, the COVID-19 pandemic, which is proportionally impacting these communities, and also, all this massive conversation and these protests and all of that. I mean, this puts HBCU leaders and students obviously, in this position of having to speak to all of this at once. And you've spoken in the past and other leaders of these colleges about the importance for actions and not statements. We were done with these statements. We've done this for a long time. I wanted to know, when you speak about actions and not statements, kind of what do you, what are you referring to, and what would you want to hope that you would see more of?
Well, when we say action, and one example that is very clear, the recent CARES Act, which played a critical role in supporting higher education in general. There was a major request from TMCF, UNCF, and NAFIO that HBCUs receive a set aside in those dollars, and that with that program, and we received close to $1 billion to support HBCUs and minority serving institutions in this country, and that has never happened before. So that's action. So those dollars immediately went to the schools, immediately went to the students, and now we're in this next stimulus bill. Both sides, the Republican in the Senate and the Democrats in the House, both, they have large, significant dollar requests that we've put forward that could play a major role with the infrastructure for these campuses. So that's the type of action we're talking about, because it will have an immediate impact on the people. What people don't understand is that just because our schools received a large one-time, I would say, stimulus, it just made them whole. It did not give them an advantage where all of a sudden they got all this cash. No, it just made them whole, because unlike some of our other sister institutions, they might have large endowments. We do not have large endowments on our campuses to draw off on during times that we have these challenges right now. So therefore, the additional support that we're receiving has been very, very grateful, and we've been very appreciative for members that have argued for us on our behalf and our students.
Right, and as you said, a sustained effort, not a one-time, this is in the news now kind of situation in order to yield these tangible results. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Williams. I really appreciate you joining us today on Time 100 Talks.
Thank you for inviting me.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Ashley C. Ford, Time 100 Talks correspondent, and I'm joined today by filmmaker J.J. Abrams and singer-songwriter Sara Bareilles. Welcome to the show. I kind of just want to start with the basics and ask, what have you guys been watching or listening to that's getting you through? Sara, can we start with you?
I've been doing a lot of rewatching of things that have landed more escapism for me. I think I've been leaning away from sort of the blood and guts of real life, which is really hard. So we've been watching a lot of superhero movies, and The Watchmen was a new series to me that I had missed when it came out somehow, and that was just a miraculous find. And what I'm listening to right now is actually a lot of the material from Little Voice, because we've launched the cast album and we've just made my concept record. So I'm doing a lot of reviews of mixes and making tweaks and changes to that. So very self-involved from an auditory standpoint is really where I'm at.
How about you, JJ?
Watching a lot of older movies with our kids. And that's been really fun. And the thing that sort of, I think, had the most impact, which I hadn't heard when it first came out, was the 1619 Project, which I thought was just remarkable.
Yes, absolutely. Nicole Hannah-Jones really, as we say, put her foot in that. She really did.
It was something else. It was I think, transformative.
I agree. Little Voice is a new Apple Plus TV series and a collaboration between the two of you. And the show follows a young singer-songwriter as she navigates life in New York City. JJ, I'm so familiar with your work in terms of other worlds, to be perfectly honest, and other beings and going out into space or having something like that happen. So what brought you back to New York City?
Uh, this was, really all Sarah and Jesse Nelson who created the show with Sarah. I mean, this was just me being a fan and loving Sarah's music and the way she expresses herself. I'm talking about you like you're not here, Sarah. There you are. And I just, it was just one of those things where when we met and we were talking about what it was to be a, a female singer songwriter and what it was to get there. It just felt like, well, that feels like something that would be as heartfelt and as moving as her music. And so I doggedly pursued trying to put together a meeting where we could just talk about what it would be. Luckily, Sarah was interested and had a relationship with Jesse, having done Waitress together. And I think the two of them have just concocted this real sort of confection. It's kind of this, like, it feels to me like a bit of it's sort of like a romantic and incredibly funny and sweet, kind of a modern day fairy tale. And I just love it.
Sarah, you fell in love with the city when you got an apartment here in around 2013, right? So what does it mean for you to be telling such a hopeful tale about the city right now in the midst of everything that the city has been through?
It feels remarkable to get a chance to kind of revisit a New York that we all know and love in a way that somehow feels suddenly nostalgic. Like it's this, the fairy tale element that JJ is referring to suddenly feels amplified because so much of what we all love about New York is not available to us right now. And so it's really, it feels like almost in this strange way, like the perfect time for this show. It's hopeful, it's heart forward, it's not cynical, it's about good people being kind to each other and like doing the best they can. And it's something that Jesse and I always really connected on was our hopefulness. And I think, it's one of the things that our main character Bess talks about in the pilot episode is that she gets sort of called out for being earnest. And I think, there's an element of that we all connect to, Jesse, JJ, and I, and that feels like there's a space for that in art making and storytelling that, we don't want to kick out the good guys completely. But I also was so inspired by the series Felicity, which was one of the first things that I knew of JJ. And so the sort of hopefulness of that series was a big inspiration for why I wanted to make anything at all, because I was such a big fan of that. So good job, JJ.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
We're currently not able to gather at things like concerts or movie theaters in the same way. It kind of makes me miss being a teenager, being in high school when I was introduced to Felicity. But we're still coming together via screens like we are now, virtual watch parties, generally being connected by storytelling. JJ, in moments like these, do you think the stories we tell and share have an outsized impact or outsized importance?
I think that given that we have, in a lot of ways, fewer distractions, I think that everything is taking on a bit of a different relationship. Like the relationship we have with time itself is different. I think that like what it is to go through a day or a week or a month isn't the same anymore, at least during this time. And I think that with stories, there was, of course, binge watching long before this, but now it's like there's just less going on that I think distracts us. So I think that stories in a lot of ways do land harder and deeper and resonate more than they would normally.
Sarah, I'd like to ask you the same question, but about the music we're listening to, because there is so much of it and it's everywhere and it's coming at us in a million different directions. But right now, people are not really listening to music necessarily on a commute. They're sitting and listening to it in their living room. Like, how do you see that changing our experience of music?
I think, what I felt like I noticed was in the initial kind of weeks and months of the pandemic, everybody got quiet and people felt a sort of reverence about not releasing new music. It almost felt like it was crass in a way to sort of offer anything. And I know that a lot of my artist friends, myself very much included, felt like it's just not a time to say anything. We all have to just sort of process and take this in. And now I see the incredible value of that, what comfort it brings, what point of connection it offers, how it makes people feel connected to the world again. So, there's big records coming out now, and I see myself listening differently because I tend to be someone who's really distracted and I'm like skip through, but I've listened to albums front to back again, which is kind of, again, a nostalgic practice. So I think maybe not more than ever, but just because we're experiencing the world through a different lens right now, it's re-highlighting how valuable people's connection to the world is through art, through television, through books, through music. It's the value of creation.
How do you think this moment could change the film industry long term?
I think that it's difficult in general, I think, for people to really imagine getting past the moment that they're in. I think it's just sort of almost human nature in a weird way. And I feel like it's not to say that we don't all know we will get past this, and we will, but it's impossible to imagine it right this second. And I'm sure that that's been true during other pandemics as well. But they have, and we will. And I think that there's another human natural need to gather and to be together. And I think that, virtual is great. And I'm sort of vaguely obsessed with sort of virtual listening parties and virtual movie watching. And it's kind of an amazing thing how that weirdly works, but it's not the same. So I think that it inevitably will and must return theater, concerts, movies. People need to get together and experience art as a group.
Do you think this moment in time could accelerate the ongoing shift to digital platforms?
Yeah, I mean, we already see it happening with deals that some studios are making with some exhibitors. It's already accelerating everything. I mean, obviously far beyond the entertainment business. I think the way business works, the way people are realizing what is actually necessary in terms of travel or workspace. And I do think that obviously things will also probably return, eventually more to the way things were probably than not. But in terms of distribution, there are a lot of, I think, things that are happening much faster than they would normally, for sure.
Sarah, how do you think the past few months are going to change the theater experience?
Well, I think what I see is just the hunger to return is just mounting. So I think one of the gifts of this time is how revealing it is that screens are just such a flimsy stand-in surrogate for real life. We miss, like you were both saying, that we just miss being in a room with people. I think there, on multiple levels, I think the theater community is doing a lot of introspection and reevaluation about, the kinds of stories that are being told and representation. And, but then in terms of a logistical standpoint, I would love to see a trend towards making theater more available. If it were to sort of do a massive reset, that ticket prices become less exorbitant. So so the theater community can diversify and expand and be more inclusive, just even from that perspective. What I see is a bunch of people just waiting to be able to perform and express and connect again. So I think, the hunger is there. I'm seeing like little chattering about tours getting back up and running, and some version of it is starting. And I think people are, if there's any place that's going to be really inventive about how are we going to make this work. I know they're being very cautious as well. Nobody wants to, fill a theater with people in a place that's not safe. So, I think we got a long way to go probably, but it might not be the worst thing in the world that we get to press reset on some different levels.
One of the things that might be possible with a reset, as you say, is expanding some of that representation in a myriad of different ways, in terms of socioeconomic status, in terms of race, in terms of gender, of all those things. How do we get more different kinds of people into the theater? And there are a lot of young people right now who definitely want to be getting into the fields that you two work in. How are you guys talking when you get the opportunity to give advice and to tell people who want to get started, like what they should know to just get started when they're facing an uphill battle, especially right now, as I think a lot of creatives are like, how is there going to be a place for me in this world when I'm ready to enter? How are you talking to people who are worried about that?
Look, I will say that that's a multifaceted question. I think that in terms of people getting started in the business in general, I think that the key is, I know this sounds crazy, but the key is to actually do the work. There are a lot of people who talk about doing the work, and there are far fewer who actually do the work. So if you're one of those who does the work, you're already in somewhat rarefied territory. And I think that then, making sure you have a community of people you trust who can give you honest response. I think doing everything you can and anything you can to get access to people who are doing the things that you're doing on any level, because that becomes something that almost invariably leads to something else. It might not be exactly what you expect, but it's usually something. The other, and I would argue, potentially, equally important, or if not more important aspect of what you asked, is the sort of inclusivity and the idea of representation. And I think that it is an undeniable moment we are in, where I think in so many different aspects of life, but certainly in the entertainment business, I think people are realizing that it is absolutely good for business. It is right in terms of the interest of the art that is being created, to not have the creation of your stories or music, films, be an elitist thing. And I know, as a white male who understands how hard it is to tell stories and make it in the business, I can't even begin to fathom how hard it would be to be Black in this business, to be Black and female in this business, to work with the obstacles that people face. It's incredible. And so, Katie and I at Bad Robot, while we do all sorts of different things and have tried all different things, and we know that we have and we will continue to make mistakes and figure it out, but it is absolutely a value and a priority for us to make sure that the projects we're working on, the artists we're working with, look the way the world looks. And I know that there's a natural tendency to look to people who sort of look like you and feel like you, the sort of usual suspects in every aspect of what people do in business. And I think that the key is to look around the room and ask yourself, do the people with whom I'm creating look like me? And if the answer is yes, you probably haven't done enough to find the people. Is it harder? Sometimes, for sure. But you have to do that work to bring people to the table, and who will let you be at the table, so that you can create a community that looks more the way the world looks than not.
I totally agree with everything you said. I was gonna say about my best advice to young artists is always go play. I mean, for young songwriters, for example, go play your music. It's the only way you're going to learn who you are, what your voice is, what your perspective is as an artist. Go play, go make mistakes, go do it wrong, go feel embarrassed, go fight for it, go, like, all of the relationship between you and your craft can only be built between you and your craft. It almost has nothing to do with the industry. And there's a real, I know that the hunger to create something that is commercially viable is, of course, there. Everyone wants to be able to make a living doing the thing they love. But I think I often remind people that, like, you can love it and also not make a living from it. Like, it can be, you can make things because you need to make things, and that's the voice of an artist, and it might not be your primary source of income, and that there's no shame in that, there's no failure in that, but that the motivation to create kind of has to feed itself a little bit. And yes, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's this incredible moment of reckoning about how narrow-minded so many of us have been in terms of our hiring practices, in terms of the stories we choose to tell, the things we gravitate towards, the things we watch, the things we listen to, like, just this blessing, this very uncomfortable blessing of waking up. So I think that it's absolutely something I think about as an artist, you know, who makes music with me on stage. That this was a very intentional kind of evolution of my music making, was to remember that, to JJ's point, not everybody in the room should look like me. We should, that it only gets better by expanding the perspective of who is creating together. And it's one of the things I feel really proud about with Little Voice, is that our cast is really, you said this well before, JJ, about it reflects the city of New York. And Jesse always said that too, is like, it looks like New York because New York is this incredible place of every size, shape, color, background, diversity, religion. It's all kind of, you know, on top of each other. And so I do feel it's one of the things that I love about this show in this moment too, is that it does reflect the city, I think, in a really beautiful way.
JJ, what have you learned from working with Sara on Little Voice?
Well, I don't think that, first of all, I think that she makes it look easy. I think that not everyone is able to translate one art form as well as one may do it to another. And the idea that you know, this incredibly you know, spirited and confused and maybe adrift for a little while, but ultimately, you know, big-hearted and certainly, you know, well-intentioned and talented young woman, you know, is going through this journey. It's, you know, it's one thing to sort of tell that in a song, which again is you know, when done as well as Sara does it, is sort of a superpower and sort of miraculous. But to then be able to tell that story, of course, with Jesse Nelson as a series with these characters, to me, the show makes me feel good. And what I've learned watching, you know, Sara work is, and it certainly has not been easy, you know, at every stage. There have been issues and things that I know we've all had to grapple with, but I've learned that it is possible to translate that heart and that soul from one form into another, and the power of tenacity and making sure that, you know, sticking to your guns and holding on to things that you believe in, that you want to see done a certain way. Again, I tip my hat to Sara, to you, and to Jesse, because, you know, those two did the heavy lifting of this show, and I got to, you know, read scripts and watch dailies and watch cuts and have weirdly the same feeling watching those dailies that I used to have when I would watch dailies of Felicity, which was, you know, these people that you know, you want to be in those rooms with them. You want to be their friend. You want to know those people. And in an incredibly, you know, cynical time where I think people can, certainly in social media, often anonymously, sort of get points for how cruel you are. And there's a kind of sort of normalcy to that. And certainly we see that politically, and certainly we see that, you know, in social media. I think it is, for me, a kind of an incredible breath of fresh air to watch a show that is sort of unabashedly sweet and unabashedly kind and humane, and that really speaks to the soul of Sarah.
Sarah, what have you learned working with JJ?
Many things. First of all, I love that JJ makes things feel possible. It's just like, well, what's the idea? Like, I feel like you talked about it with this metaphor of like, you just have to make the thing right here. You just make the thing that you love and it has to sit right here. And you sort of have to ignore everything that's happening out here and just make the thing that you love. Like, to keep your attention really intent on preserving the heart of the thing you're making. And inevitably with television, which was so much, I mean, I've cried on his shoulder and just been like, it's so much, I'm like soul crushing. It's just so much bigger than anything I've done. Just the sheer number of people on the set is just an enormous number of people. But to be able to really, we did have to fight hard, and I give Jessie Nelson so much credit for this too. We were very bonded in this way about trying to zero in on what our little voice was telling us and really trying to fight for that. And you win some, you lose some, and that's kind of, I think, the nature of the beast here. But it was, I really took to heart JJ's willingness to take chances on new voices, and to trust us, an incredible amount of trust to trust your collaborators that they're going to sort of rise to meet the challenge. I also think that you're playful, JJ. Like you're it would have been really easy for me to get very serious about this project because it felt really big and important, and it's the biggest thing I've ever done. And it's nice to work with someone who has had so much experience because he helps hold it lightly in a way. And I think sometimes that's good for the work. So I like him. What can I say?
Sarah, JJ, thank you both so much for joining us today. This has been really, really fun. I've really enjoyed myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you, Ashley, JJ, and Sarah, for that great conversation. Finally, we have Sal Khan, founder and CEO of the Khan Academy, who will be speaking with my colleague, Time Senior Editor Emma Barker-Bonomo.
Hi, I'm Emma Barker-Bonomo, Senior Editor at Time, and I'm joined today by Sal Khan, educator and founder of Khan Academy. Welcome to Time 100 Talks, Sal.
Great to be here, Emma.
So in March, as school districts began to move towards distance learning models, Khan Academy was already implementing sample study schedules for different grade levels and other support systems for parents and teachers. You've said that you pulled together a war room very early in the process, even in February, to solve problems for teachers and parents. What were the most pressing issues for you to solve in those early days?
Yeah, we first caught wind that this might become a thing when we started seeing some of our usage spike in Asia. And we got one letter in particular, I remember, from a teacher in South Korea saying that how they were leaning on Khan Academy through their school closures. And that was the first time it dawned on us that, wow, how wild is that? A whole country closing down schools because of this virus. And then as you got into early March, it started to become increasingly possible that it could happen in the US. And that's where we realized, it's one of those moments where you look left and you look right and you say, I guess this is us, because people are going to need something that's accessible, that works at home, that works in schools, that covers many subjects and grades, that's trusted, that's accessible, that's available on cell phones, tablets, computers, that's free, ideally. So above and beyond the content that we've been working on for many years across subjects and grades, we realized that parents are going to need ways to structure the day. They were feeling overwhelmed. When my kids are not going to school as of next week, how does that work? What does the day look like? So we put out these daily schedules for kids of different ages, not just how to use Khan Academy for different subjects, but also how do you make sure they're getting enough playtime? How do you make sure they're getting enough relaxation, time with family? Then we started, when it became clear that the school closures were going to be through the end of the year, we put out learning plans. We also put out learning plans for the summer. How do you leverage the summer to keep learning or to make up any learning loss you might have had? And then as we were going into this coming school year, and early in the summer, we assumed that this coming school year might be normal, but we said even if it is normal, kids are going to show up with huge gaps. And so we created what we call Get Ready for Grade Level courses on Khan Academy. We've always had the various grade level courses, but we've seen teachers have a lot of positive gains with students when they're able to back students up to really basic prerequisites and make sure that they had a strong foundation up into the grade level. So we started creating those courses, and we just launched them actually midsummer. And then obviously now it's becoming increasingly clear that this coming back to school is in most places going to continue to be distance, and this could last well into this coming school year. And so we're continuing to just revamp the learning plans, the calendars. We're putting more supports out for teachers and parents on webinars on how they can run this stuff. And we're trying to put out as many views as we can about what does good distance look like in this crisis.
I know you're in contact with a lot of school district leaders around the country. What are some of the most innovative and impactful approaches you've heard from educators to keep students learning in hybrid or totally remote environments?
Yeah, so the best practice that we're seeing is, I pick on math, but this could translate to many subjects. But let's say in math, clearly no longer have 5 1-hour periods a day to work with kids. And so the best practice we've seen is, and once again, this is predicated on having internet access and having an environment at home. And those are very hard questions right now. But assuming these kids have some access to devices, some access to internet, for them to do some daily practice on Khan Academy, 30 minutes a day, 40 minutes a day, depending on their age level. And that can be personalized so that they work on exactly in kind of their zone of proximal development. And that they should have at least 2 to 3 synchronous sessions over video conference with their teachers. Now, the difference is 55 minutes or an hour don't work well on video conference. And especially if it's, the teacher lecturing to students, it does not work well. One could argue it's not even optimal for in-person. But when you're together, or when you're on video conference, it's key that the teachers pull the students out of the screen, so to speak. So to kind of cold call them, make sure that you're asking every student's opinions, make it much more about group problem solving. Instead of giving a lecture, give an interesting problem for the kids to work on initially by themselves, and put them into groups for them to work on together. They can go into virtual breakout sessions. And so we've seen the teachers that have done that have actually been able to keep their kids learning quite well. That combination of asynchronous on Khan Academy and then synchronous using video conferencing. Above and beyond that, there's a bit of a side effort that I've been doing. It's not officially part of Khan Academy, but I've been doing it on the side. I hope it becomes part of Khan Academy in the future. It's called schoolhouse.world. And we've started piloting with the school district, Long Beach in Southern California. And this is a way that the students who need tutoring, live tutoring, any teacher in the Long Beach example can volunteer to tutor any student in the district. And they're doing these group tutoring sessions. So it's this matchmaking between students who need live help and any teacher in the district who's able to provide that live help in a tutoring session. And we're also doing a pilot where we're opening that up to the broader world. Any kid in the world who needs help, and there's vetting involved, any teacher or volunteer, and we vet them, that they can run a group tutoring session, can do that as well. So we think that's going to be an interesting backstop for in a lot of places where they're not able to provide as many synchronous supports as we'd like.
You mentioned that 55-minute, hour-long classes, you're now thinking may not even be, a goal or good practice in person. Has this moment shifted your thinking about education or broader education in any way?
It's accelerated a lot of what was probably already happening more slowly. A lot of what we've always talked about at Khan Academy is that learning should not be bound by time or space. That clearly is a necessity in the COVID world, that it's not bound by time or space. A lot of what we've talked about is personalization of learning, that the reason why a lot of kids have trouble with a lot of subjects, but especially math and science, isn't their innate abilities, because they accumulate gaps. They get an 80% on one test, so they didn't miss 20%. They get a 70% on another test, they miss 30%. And those gaps accumulate over time. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in an algebra class or a physics class and nothing makes sense, but it's because you didn't learn decimals well, or you didn't learn negative numbers well. And so personalization, allowing students to learn at their own time and pace, has been one of our pillars. And obviously that becomes even more important in this COVID world, where some kids are accumulating pretty significant gaps now while other kids are continuing to learn. Another, I guess you could say, principle that we've been talking about for many years now, but becomes even more important in a COVID world, is making, when human beings get together, and that could be in person or over video conference, to make it as human and as interactive as possible. So even pre-COVID, what we saw the best practice in classrooms and what we advocated for is don't lecture. Use class time to do problem solving. You could have some kids work at their own time and pace, and then the teacher can look at a dashboard and say, okay, those 5 kids are having trouble with this skill. Let me take them aside. Maybe they're having trouble academically. Maybe they need a pep talk. Maybe they need to be motivated in some way to do that. If a lot of the kids are at pace, then do a Socratic dialogue, do an interesting project. But everything in the classroom, when humans get together, should be about human interaction. It should not be about, fingers on your lips and, listen to the adult for the full hour. All of that becomes that much more important in this COVID world, where, as we mentioned, any of us of any age to sit 55 minutes or an hour listening to a lecture on Zoom, that might as well be a video. And even as a video, I wouldn't recommend a 60-minute video unless it's pretty well produced. I would chunk it up. But it's all about driving interaction. And I say the last piece is this notion of competency-based learning. Traditional transcripts or grades or credits is based on how much time you spend in a seat for the most part. In college, they literally call it credit hours. It should instead be based on the outcome. So regardless of where and how long it took you to learn, did you learn the algebra or the English or the American history at a level that we could say that is true competency? So those have all been pre-COVID points of view, but they've all become really necessities now in this COVID world, especially if this lasts for another year.
Many parents have struggled with the switch to in-home instruction and having to guide their children through this kind of remote learning. You're a dad yourself. How have you been handling that? What are the biggest lessons you've learned, and what would you say to a parent who's worried about having to deal with that come the fall?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I'm a dad. I have an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 5-year-old. Our family has been lucky on many levels going through this crisis. The school that my children go to, it's a school that I helped start. It's called Khan Lab School, and that school, it's a physical school, but it was always focused on teachers as guides and mentors, and really helping kids kind of develop their own agency. So that school has done a really good job, and I can't take a lot of credit for it. It's really the teachers and the administration there. Literally within 2 days, they were completely, they didn't miss a beat. They had already developed a lot of the skills in the students, and so the students were able to navigate it on their own. And that the teachers are also very tech savvy and have been really incredible supporting the kids, doing goal setting with the kids on Zoom and whatever else while they did a lot of asynchronous work. And then on top of that, I have, my mother-in-law lives with us, my wife. She's a physician, but she's been able to be at home 2 days a week. And obviously my job, there's a lot going on, but it has some flexibility in it. I get to do work virtually. So that's all been blessings. But even then, as you can imagine, it's been stressful in our house. So I could imagine in many other houses that didn't have all of these supports, far more stressful. And what I remind everyone, I remind myself, I remind my wife, and I remind any family who asks is, remember, this is a pandemic, and the number one thing is your kind of the basics. And one of the basics, obviously, you need the economics, the food, the shelter, but you also need your mental health. And so the last thing that any family needs right now is to put more pressure on themselves or to be feeling inadequate, because that pressure and that stress is just going to translate into the kids. And if the kids feel stress and anxiety, then the learning is going to be a lot harder. And the best way to do that is to say, look, no one is fully replicating school during COVID right now. And so that shouldn't be the aspiration. That's an expectation that will cause stress. The important thing is focus on the basics, and they are math, reading, and writing. If your child or your children can keep working on those things, and depending on the age of the student, 20, 30, 40 minutes a week per subject area, that only amounts to about 2 hours a day. They're going to be just fine. And the tools are there. In math, you have Khan Academy. And depending on the age level and reading and writing, we have Khan Academy. We have things like our SAT prep, and we have early learning things. But you can also just have reading lists, books, and there's many of them. We've published a few during COVID for different kids of different age groups, and have the kids read, have a conversation about it at lunch, have the kids write about interesting topics, put it on Medium, put it on a blog post someplace, and have the family, send it out to the family. If your children do those three things, which is literally about 2 hours a day, they're going to do just fine academically. Those skills aren't going to atrophy. And then on top of that, make sure that they get the socialization. The ideal socialization is some type of in-person socialization that's COVID safe. What we're doing is, a small group of families that we know are taking proper precautions. We are, getting, one or two families together in a backyard with masks on or in a local park. And we're doing that pretty regularly to make sure our kids and frankly us as adults are getting the socialization and that human connection that's so important. But if you do those things, I think, considering the circumstances, you'll be fine.
You mentioned some gaps that can develop in learning for kids. The move to distance learning has made the digital divide even more apparent. Millions of kids don't have broadband access, even in America. How are you thinking about reaching those kids going forward?
Yeah, this is, I think, the central question, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I wish I could give a more optimistic answer about what the crisis is doing, but it's putting inequity in starker relief. As you mentioned, even fairly, even in the US, a lot of our school districts, 20-30% of the kids didn't have internet access when the crisis started. The school districts, many school districts have been doing heroic efforts to get internet access and get devices in families. But even there, New York City, I think, distributed close to 300,000 laptops, Los Angeles close to 200,000, Miami did a similar number. Even in those circumstances, they're still not able to engage all the students. You can imagine, even when you have physical school, there's some subset of kids that are just disengaged for various reasons. It could be just other contextual things in their life. Now that the kids are at home, even when they've distributed laptops and things like that, they might be sharing one computer with the entire family. There might be many people living in the house, or maybe the parents have to work, they're essential workers. And so there isn't the parent support at home. And so for whatever reason, and people are still learning, 5-10% of the population of a lot of districts, they've just kind of fallen off. So that's going to be a major issue when we come back on how do we get these kids back up to speed. And you can imagine these were the kids that were already behind pre-COVID, and so how do you make up for all of that that's been going on? But at our level, we're still a relatively small nonprofit. We do what we can, obviously, to advocate, talk to the telecom carriers. We're close partners. We've partnered with folks like AT&T and Comcast, and they're doing really great work trying to get, bridge the digital divide. But we're using our soapbox as much as possible to say, look, we're going to create the content, the software, the tools for teachers, for families, for students, but they do need access. And so we're doing whatever we can to advocate for it.
Does that mean, asking telecom companies to provide it for free to certain families, or what kind of advocacy are you doing?
Yeah, it's really just trying to convince whoever we can. We're signatories. Common Sense Media has been doing an effort to try to get internet access more broadly accessible. The telecom companies are actually, they are doing the right thing, which is, and I think no one had to tell them, is that during the crisis they all I think had these kind of lower cost internet solutions for lower income families. They always had that. I know Comcast, for example, had Internet Essentials, which was $10 a month, but my understanding is over the course of the crisis, they've made all of those things free, which is the right thing to do. And, I'm not a lobbyist. I've never actually lobbied for legislation, but just the back of the envelope with these various stimulus packages, $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there, my back of the envelope, you could get internet connection and a device to practically every family in this country for several tens of billions. So, 10 or $20 billion, which obviously is a large number for any individual. But when you think on the scale of government and we think about $1 trillion stimulus package, 20 billion is what, 2% of that. So, and that has not just academic benefits, that has economic benefits. Families can do remote work, they can look for jobs. And it has, frankly, mental health benefits when, what would any of us do if we're not able to connect with friends and family over video conference right now?
As some businesses reopen and parents return to their workplaces, it's becoming more and more clear that many families rely on schools not only for education, but also for childcare when they go back to work. Khan Academy has kind of separated those two by being a more remote educational system. Do you think that's a problem in the American education system?
Well, it is an important it is an important function of schools. I mean, it's to educate, and it's not just to educate, not just to kind of give credit and credentials. There's a socialization component of education, which it's not explicitly stated in the standards. Like this year, kids will learn to resolve crisis, or deal with bullying or whatever. But we all know that's part of the in-person physical school process. And then of course there's childcare. If you families that are working, which are most families with both parents or one parent working, or the only parent working, you need the school system. And this goes back to your inequity crisis. I think the inequity is getting a little bit worse now, or a lot worse, because affluent parents, one, they tend to have more flexible jobs. I mean, I get to work from home. I'm in our bedroom walk-in closet right now. This is actually where Khan Academy all started. My kids are probably about 30 feet that way. And so I can still support them to some degree. Middle income or affluent families might be able to get other supports. They might be able to hire tutors, or increasingly people are talking about these pods, these pod leaders that people can set up. I think middle class and upper middle class and affluent families also have, frankly, just access to more open space, have a backyard where you can meet people and be more COVID safe and all of this type of stuff. So I think it's a really, really tough issue.
Before COVID-19, many people, parents and students, took our public education system sort of for granted, and that includes the childcare of it. How do you hope our attitudes towards education and investing in it changes as a result of this moment?
Yeah, I think number one, we talked about digital divide. I've never seen more energy. The US has actually done a pretty good job closing the digital divide in school settings. 10 years ago, when I visited a lot of schools did not have adequate internet connections or computers. Now, most schools, especially schools that are either urban or suburban, even in fairly low resourced areas, have reasonable devices in the school. But what COVID has shown us is the digital divide at home. And I hope coming out of it, we talk about these very heroic efforts that these districts and these cities and these philanthropists have been doing. I believe coming out of the COVID crisis, people will view the at-home digital divide as a human rights issue, that not having internet access and a device at home is like not having water or electricity or heating in your house. And so I hope, and I'm seeing positive signs, that when we, 3-4 years in the future, almost everyone in America will have access, and COVID will be the accelerant for that. So that could be a silver lining of this entire crisis. I think you have a whole generation of teachers that have been kind of thrown into the deep end on distance learning, but that will have positive benefits to it. It's suboptimal in the short term, but in the long term, they are going to be more tech savvy and going to be more willing to lean on various blended learning, video conference, whatever types of tools. I think you have a whole generation of parents who have realized that they have to get more engaged in their children's education. And the reality is, even pre-COVID, I think a lot of families said, well, I'll just send my kids, I'll put them on the bus and they'll show up, and then, they'll get educated. And oftentimes that happens. But if as a parent, if you really want to make sure that your kids, doesn't fall through the cracks, you do have to be pretty engaged. You do have to keep track of what they're learning, help, tutor them when there's no other supports. And so I think that could be a silver lining, a whole generation of families that are newly engaged. And, there's also going to be some students that are going to discover through more independence in their learning that's a really important muscle to have. And that'll hopefully benefit them the rest of their life. And there's obviously these notions of that we were talking about earlier, competency-based learning, personalization, that will hopefully become more mainstream.
Some experts are expecting the pandemic to shift us further towards telecommuting in the future, even post-pandemic. And that could happen in education too. But you have said that you see a lot of value in in-person instruction, I imagine, because of the socialization of it. Do you think remote education is a sustainable way to do it? I mean, we are now seeing more and more evidence that this could go on for quite a while. Should we be setting up a more sustainable system of remote education rather than just dealing with the here and now of it?
Yeah, I think it's been a problem that from the, as early as last March, everyone's been treating this as like a month-long crisis, but then they keep they keep pushing it off. And when you treat it as a month-long crisis, then you never really solve it. and you just kind of kick the can down the road. And we're seeing that now. You know, we're 5-6 months into the crisis, and this coming back to school is going to be pretty chaotic, and it's going to be pretty suboptimal. You know, frankly, folks haven't had a chance to really think through how the learning is going to happen. You know, they've really been thinking about how do you socially distance, or can you socially distance, and stuff like that. And, you know, what I've told several government officials, and we told this in April and May, is like, you should think about this as a 2-year plan. Hopefully it's not, but what if it is? and you keep doing this 1 month or 2 months at a time, then even in 2 years, we're going to have this continued suboptimal solution, and people are going to be really frustrated, and you're going to have, you know, the haves and the have-nots are going to diverge that much more over the course of 2 years. And, you know, the writing's on the wall. This is going to last at least through this school year. And you don't hear a lot of people even saying that, even though it's somewhat obvious when you talk to the epidemiologists. Even if one of these vaccine trials are successful by January, and they've already started manufacturing some of them speculatively, it'll take to distribute hundreds of millions of vaccine doses. It's going to take months and months and months. And then, you know, before people feel confident to send their kids back to school. So this is a long haul. So people for sure have to be thinking about this systemically. I mean, to your question, I don't think pure distance learning is optimal for most students. I think it can be a very valuable thing for kids in rural areas who might not have access to certain schools or certain courses. It could be very useful for all students for parts of their education. If they want to take a certain elective, or they want to take something maybe their school doesn't offer it at a rigorous level, they can do that. But for me, the ideal is always a combination of using digital, distance. And, you know, digital doesn't have to be distance either. Digital can happen in a physical setting as well. But I think this crisis, you know, the school that my kids go to, I'm on the board of it, and I've told them that, look, I think you have to reinvent the school in this world. And they already have done a good job, but like fundamentally, like maybe you unpack the models. Like, this is learning, this is socialization, this is the in-person guidance, in-person experience, sports, clubs, whatever. And you kind of offer an a la carte, you know, and people make the portfolio of what makes sense for them. And that for sure makes sense in this COVID world, but it could make a lot of sense for folks post-COVID as well.
Sal, thank you so much for joining me here on Time 100 Talks. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a bunch, Emma. Thanks for including me.
Thank you, Emma and Sal, and all of our other Time contributors and guests. Make sure to follow Time on social media and use the hashtag Time100Talks to keep the conversation going. If you haven't already done so, make sure to subscribe to Time at time.com/subscribe. And for more information on Time 100 Talks, past or future episodes, check out time.com/Time100 Talks. We'll be back next week with another episode of Time 100 Talks. Until then, thanks for joining us, and I'll see you soon.